I'm David Wilcock, and this is Wisdom Teachings. Are there intrinsic laws within quantum mechanics itself that actually cause DNA to form as a basic emanation of the laws of quantum physics? Could these same DNA crystals be arising out of a frequency pattern very different than the conventional view? Is it possible that DNA itself could spontaneously evolve by a change in frequency, such as what we've already been discussing is happening in the solar system? Would this in fact give greater credence to the 35 different ancient prophecies from all over the world about the idea that we would go through some epic solar system change leading to spontaneous human evolution? That's what we're going to be discussing in this episode of Wisdom Teachings. Well, I am so excited to be bringing you this information. Everything that I've been telling you for the last 5 years is all building up to this. This module of information starting in this season takes us into a whole new realm, because up until now, we've investigated this idea of a geometric cosmos, but it still has stayed within the realm of what we would normally think of as dead matter. But there are new scientific studies coming out now. In fact, one that just emerged in December of 2017, telling us that life does in fact exist, very likely, all over the universe. So this study comes to us from University of Los Angeles, UCLA, and it suggests, again, life is common throughout the universe. So let's take a look at exactly what they said here. This is the actual link. And notice, interestingly enough, that they published it on the winter solstice, which is also the Mayan calendar end date. If you were back to 5 years before, 2012, they did it on December 21st, and the headline says, "Ancient fossil microorganisms indicate that life in the universe is common." Now, before I even read any of this to you, let me just say, I am so relieved to be seeing this information reaching the light of day, after I've been saying the same thing ever since I got online in the late 1990s. Now science is catching up, and they have very compelling reasons to believe that life must be all over the universe. So just to give you an overview before I read the excerpts from this article, the idea is that the Earth only formed 4 billion years ago, and it only cooled down enough for liquid water about 3.8 billion years ago. So then we're supposed to believe that all of the magic that led to the creation of life occurred in a very short period of time, because microorganisms have been found that are almost as old as when liquid water began on Earth. Now you have to remember something important here. When we're talking about single-celled organisms, even that level, microorganisms, which could in fact have multiple cells, not just one, by the time you get to that stage of evolution of life, you have solved the majority of all the problems that need to be solved in order to have biological life occur. You've got DNA, which is staggeringly complex. You have cell mitosis, the separation of cells. You have respiration. You have locomotion. They can move around. They can breathe. All of the things that make life so intrinsic, that make life what it does, start at the cellular level. So the cell is extraordinarily complex. We still can't even begin to understand the full depth of cellular technology, if you want to call it that. We just have a lot of question marks, and when we start to get into more of this biological stuff, you're going to see that frequency and geometry plays a much greater role than we ever thought was possible. So just so that we're clear, all of the stuff that's involved in getting the cell to form is probably 80–90% of the challenge of evolution. Once you've got cells, they can grow into organ systems, they can make larger organisms, but by the time you've got the cell, you've solved most of the problems. The real problem is in how do you construct that cell? How do you get the cell to actually work? And in the conventional Charles Darwin-inspired model of biology, we're literally being taught that cells formed out of nothing, that they just arose from all these random accidents. And of course, as I've said before, they talk about this primordial soup, that this basic muck of ingredients got hit by lightning, and they combined in just the right way to make this complex cellular microstructure with DNA and all. It's like, wait a minute. A bolt of lightning hitting mud, that's the answer? It probably would have taken billions of years by random processes to get up to the point that you would even have a cell that's alive based on this random idea. And so finally, science is coming to accept, no, we can't explain it away by saying it's random. It had to have already been there before. So that's the pretext for this. Now let's read specific excerpts of what they said in this article. A new analysis of the oldest known fossil microorganisms provides strong evidence to support an increasingly widespread understanding that life in the universe is common. Now hold on a minute. An increasingly widespread understanding that life in the universe is common? You see how this paves the way for disclosure? Because once you get to life is common, then why wouldn't it be intelligent life? And then you have this guy, as I've talked about in other lectures, coming out of Yale saying convergent evolution, that everything's going to want to make a humanoid being because it's the right way to do it. You got the brain at the top, it's a nice domed skull. The dome is crack resistant, so if you fall, it's the largest distance from the ground. You got to have the nostrils above the mouth, so when you eat, it doesn't fall into your nose. You want to have the eyes above the nose, so you don't get stuff in your eyes. You want to have the ears on the side. You got to have hands. You got to be able to walk on two legs. This is a common thing that would work very well for intelligent life, no matter where it goes. So all of this stuff is interesting, an increasingly widespread understanding that life is common. Okay, you're the scientist, so I've been saying this for 20 years, so I'm very happy about this. Let's keep reading. The microorganisms from Western Australia are 3.465 billion years old. And again, as I was saying, the universe is 13.5 billion years old, roughly speaking. The Earth started 4 billion years ago, and it cooled down approximately 3.8 billion years ago. So some of these organisms seem to go back 3.6, maybe even older, billion years old. 3.6 is very close to 3.8. So in 0.2 billion years, you have the whole problem of cells and DNA and life solved by random processes. It's silly. But the only thing, the only thread that a skeptic could hold on to try to say, well, maybe there's a way that this could have been done randomly, these UCLA scientists just slammed it down, because what you're about to see is a wide diversity of different types of microorganisms that all just sprung out of the box, out of nowhere, 3.465 billion years ago. Let's take a look. Scientists from UCLA and the University of Wisconsin-Madison report today in the journal Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences that 2 of the species they studied appear to have performed a primitive form of photosynthesis. That means they're like plants. Another apparently produced methane gas, very different than plants. They produce oxygen. And 2 others appear to have consumed methane and used it to build their cell walls. So right at the beginning here, we have a complex ecosystem that mirrors in a very primordial form what we see later on in much more advanced biology. We have photosynthetic bacteria, plant bacteria. We have methane-producing bacteria, animal bacteria. And then we also have the critters that like the methane, that want to eat that, which could be like the insects. So it's like all of this stuff is there at the beginning. The ecosystem, the complexity, the interrelationships between these microorganisms, they're already there. So you can see why I'm so excited about this. This is one of those scientific studies that just spikes the ball over the goal line and takes what I've been trying to tell you all this time, and now the scientists are saying it. So here is an example of an ancient fossil microorganism that actually consumed methane, and J. William Schaff is the key guy that was doing this, as you can see at the bottom. The evidence that a diverse group of organisms had already evolved extremely early in the Earth's history, combined with scientists' knowledge of the vast number of stars in the universe and the growing understanding that planets orbit so many of them, strengthens the case for life existing elsewhere in the universe because it would be extremely unlikely that life formed quickly on Earth but did not arise anywhere else. So the idea is it did not just form on Earth, it's everywhere, and it just got dropped off here by whatever processes are already in place. And we've already talked before about Hoyle and Wickramasinghe, in which they discovered that 99.9% of all the dust in our galaxy has the same optical characteristics as if you put freeze-dried bacteria and set it loose in space. Whoa, David, what are you saying? What I'm saying is that's a geeky way of saying that the sun and all other stars all they do is give off bacteria. The dust, all the stuff that they're shooting out, it's bacteria. It's little guys that at one point were nice and fresh, and then they go out into the cold of space and they get freeze-dried and they shrink, 70% hollow on the inside. Once you have that hollowness, there's only one thing that does that, it's bacteria. And that's what all the dust looks like in our galaxy. So the hypothesis is stars are naturally giving off bacteria all the time. Therefore, this stuff on Earth has been coming out of the sun ever since the sun started, and it just so happens that it got dropped off on Earth as soon as there was enough water here that they could actually stick and stay. Because before the water was there, you wouldn't have the fossilizing of the bacteria. They might still be coming around, but they wouldn't be able to stick in such a way that you could get fossils. Fossils require things to be wet and then to get reheated like you're firing clay in a kiln. So that's why you have to wait a little while for the water to show up. And then this is just luck that they happen to find this very old deposit of land in Western Australia that happens to be 3.465 billion years old. So this really shifts everything. They're talking about planets are all over the place. They have liquid water, though they don't really mention that here, and that microbes with a complex ecosystem showed up from the beginning here on Earth. This is the scientist, the head scientist now talking. By 3.465 billion years ago, life was already diverse on Earth. That's clear. Primitive photosynthesizers, i.e. plants. Methane producers, i.e. like animals. Methane users, i.e. like insects. According to J. William Schopf, a professor of paleobiology in the UCLA College and the lead author of the study. And here is a picture of Schopf, and you can clearly see this guy is no joke. This is real science. This is not quackademics at all. This tells us life had to have begun substantially earlier, and it confirms it was not difficult for primitive life to form on Earth and to evolve into more advanced microorganisms. Schopf said scientists still do not know how much earlier life might have begun, but it obviously could be the beginning of the universe. And then he says, this is the key line right here, the mic drop. If the conditions are right, it looks like life in the universe should be widespread. There you have it. Boom! Mainstream academic scientist from UCLA, a very credible institution, saying that life in the universe looks like it should be widespread. And all you have to do is start bringing back in the Wickramasinghe and Hoyle data about the galactic dust. And it's like, well, that's what stars are doing ever since they started. The only thing they're giving off is bacteria. That's all they do. The whole frickin' universe is a life-generating cosmos, which then makes us start to think, well, wait a minute. I'm alive, and my body is generating bacteria. In fact, there's 10 times more, I don't know if you know this, there's 10 times more bacterial cells in your body than there are human cells. So you have far more microbes that are actually not directly a part of you, but work in harmony with you, than you have in your own body, that are your actual cells. So if that's true, then if stars are giving off all this bacteria, stars could now be life forms. And now you have to think differently. You have to say, well, I hadn't really thought about a star being alive. I hadn't really thought about planets being alive. But all of this stuff is already in the Law of One model. It's already in the great ancient religious texts, the Hindu Mahabharata. It's basically in the Bible if you want to read it a certain way. It's all over the place. This idea that the cosmos is alive. It is a life-generating machine. That is the key of where this is all going. Now I want to take you back to this core intrinsic principle that we were starting to explore in the previous episodes before we got into all of the other stuff, regarding the idea that all of space and time is the emanation of a single geometric form. So just so that we have a quick recap here, and I'm not going to go through all this again because then you'll write comments that are hateful and then I'll get in trouble. We have Nima Arkani Hamed and Yaroslav Trunka. Remember those two guys? And what they found was that these squiggles in the quantum realm that we measure in bubble chambers and these kinds of things all can be derived from a single geometric pattern. And it's only one pattern, which means that literally any quantum activity in the entire universe, if you zoom in on it enough, you zoom down to one point that the whole entire universe is emanating from, as if it is a seed, and the seed flowers into the universe, but the whole universe is like a hologram. It's not really there. The only thing that really exists is the seed. And so the seed fractalizes out, and as it fractalizes out, it actually appears to be occupying space, but you could trace each part of it and trace it back to the center. So stars would be fractals of this original geometry. Each star has a spherical identity which encapsulates all the different fractals of this geometry that I've been showing you. So the whole universe is this blossoming fractal from one geometry. And do you remember when I was talking about Bataner and Florido and Inasto? And I showed you these superclusters of galaxies, and they're all in these perfect geometric patterns. Why is that? Because that geometry is the flowering of the seed. And all of the galaxies must stay in the geometric lines. We also talked about how galaxies themselves have very strange kinks in the galactic arms. They don't move in a spiral. They actually go straight and then they bend very geometrically. That's because this geometry is a resonance pattern. The geometry is showing us vibration. And so the really amazing thing that you're going to start to see in this season is how DNA is a byproduct of resonance directly. There's no fudge factor that we have to do on this stuff. So just for your review, here is the shape that we saw from these two scientists. This is an original diagram they made of what they call the amplituhedron, this form that the entire universe is made of. Well, something didn't quite look right to me. It seemed a little asymmetrical. I start to think about this. This is the Merkaba, two tetrahedrons back to back. You could flatten it down into 2 dimensions and have it be the Star of David. Same basic idea. And when I started to visualize this, as you're seeing here, I said, oh my God, the math worked out fine. All they needed was to do 4 of the tetrahedrons, but you can add the rest in, and now you have the Merkaba, and it's just got more symmetry, but this actually makes more sense. But bear in mind, even if you don't like that and you don't want to go there, the simple fact that the shape itself is made out of 4 tetrahedrons, each tetrahedron has that Merkaba enfolded within it, because all of this geometry has this quality they call symmetry, which means you can flip it inside out, and depending on what type of geometry it is, you'll get either another tetrahedron, as in the case of tetrahedrons. If you have the octahedron, it'll flip over into a cube, and if you have the icosahedron, which is those 20 equilateral triangles like a soccer ball, you flip that one over and it turns into a dodecahedron, as I've said, and that's 12 pentagons in a ball. So this geometry is a function of resonance. It didn't take all that long. It was maybe about a year, 2 years after I had first started to get this information about the idea that the universe is a Merkaba that I started to say, well, my God, that means it's a photon. That means that everything is made of light. And that totally fits with all of the great ancient teachings which appear to have been given to us by gods. People who very likely had much more advanced technology at the time they arrived thousands of years ago than we do now. So if those gods had that advanced technology, then they hid it into things like the Star of David, things like the Masonic square and compass symbol, things like the Hindu mandalas that also show the Star of David, and then it iterating into other geometric patterns as well. This is all stuff that we've covered before. And I also want to remind you that this scientist, Radek Tropkiewicz, was able to trap photons in this very exotic-looking laser arrangement that he's got there, and this is what he saw. The photons, when captured, clearly have this tetrahedral formation. It is the same Merkaba, just tilted on a different angle. It's the same thing that you're seeing here, just slightly more tilted. So what am I saying? I'm saying that these guys, as they're looking at this geometry, inadvertently discovered the original photon that the whole universe is made from. God said, "Let there be light," and there was light, right? The universe was started from light. We hear this all the time. Even esoteric people in modern times getting alleged information telepathically from some higher source, they always say the universe is made of light. Well, we found the science for that. And what's so cool is that the photon is now this geometric pattern. It's a resonance pattern. And all other photons in the universe are holograms of the original one, which is exactly what the law of one says. So just another quick review. Dr. Hans Jenny took liquid water and put sand in it and vibrated it. That's all he did, is vibrate sand and water with nice pure sound frequency, and boom, look at what he got. The same geometry that we see at the origin of the universe. All you do to get that is create vibration, nothing else. Vibration creates geometry. Geometric structure is a function of frequency. It's very straightforward, it's elegant, it's beautiful, it's amazing. I've also showed you this diagram in which we see that the geometry can morph depending on the frequency. So on the right, we have our Merkaba. On the left, we now have octahedrons and cubes, because remember, this is a 3D drop. This is not a flat diagram. That's a three-dimensional structure in there. So these are, in fact, the geometric platonic solids, as we call them. And in this diagram, as I've showed you before, you have all these different phases of geometry that you get simply by changing frequency. And remember, we also had this, where if you have a larger amount of water with sand, then it starts to create multicellular structure, just like we see in the way that molecules line up to form solids, and just like we see with cells forming biological life. That's the part we hadn't gotten into yet. Once we make a linkage point between DNA and geometry, it's all over. It's a whole new reality in which that original photon, that original Merkaba, is in fact geometrically fractalizing out into the universe, and DNA is another natural byproduct of its frequency. DNA and the dodecahedron are intimately linked, and I will show you that. Another brief review, just so this is all fresh in your head, shows how this geometry iterates into matter. This was Dr. Robert Moon, who looked at the nucleus and cracked the code of the atomic nucleus by seeing that this pattern is actually hiding inside the atom depending upon how many protons it has. So in his model, the corners of this geometry are what we call protons, and you can throw away neutrons because you don't need them. There's nothing to balance. The geometry itself is what keeps the harmony and the balance. The neutron is just an assumption. So look in the center of this pattern and you'll see the cube. How many corners does the cube have? There's 4 on the top, 4 on the bottom. Well, that's oxygen. That's the first major stable element, 62.55% of the mass in the universe. This is his solution. So every time you're breathing oxygen, you're breathing atoms with these little cubes in them. Then you got to go to the second level, which is the octahedron with the cube inside. You got to add up all those corners together. So you have your 8 corners of the cube, then you add the 6 more for the octahedron, and now you got silicon, 14 protons, and 21.2% of the mass in the universe, in our Earth at least. So again, these are the most stable. That's why there's more of them than anything else, because atoms want to be there. They want to have these geometric patterns. The other atoms that don't have it are kind of unstable, and they're always wanting to bond. And bonding now means they're creating this geometry. So it totally reinvents what we think. The next shell, as I've said to you before, we go through oxygen, silicon, and then we have iron, which is 1.2%, and now you got your icosahedron there. That's the next layer of this. Then we go down to the bottom of the list. The last one is the dodecahedron, and remember that you got to add all the protons together, so each of the corners, right? So you start with 8, you add the 6 corners of the octahedron, you get 14. You add the 12 corners of the icosahedron to 26, and then you add the 20 corners of the dodec, and now you go up to 46. And 46 protons is palladium, and palladium also, as I've said, has really weird properties with cold fusion. You drop those little guys into heavy hydrogen and they create all this extra heat. And iron is weird because it has an intrinsic magnetic field. So there's something about this geometry that's like gating into universal energy and allowing things like magnetic energy and cold fusion to form. So that's all fine and good. We've been through that stuff. Another really cool thing that I don't think I've ever talked about in this show before is that Nassim Haramein has done some really cool work about the fractal nature of each proton. So remember now, I'm saying protons are the corners of a geometric solid, which is ultimately a frequency. That means matter is just a vibration. There's nothing really there. So if your consciousness can generate those frequencies, you could generate matter, you could make matter levitate, you could transform matter, which is what all the ancient masters seem to do. And remember that each proton, each atom, is somehow a fractal of the original cosmos. So Nassim has a very interesting spin on this, which you can see in his work, and this is the key diagram that he's got. And we're not going to get into all this. You can study it more if you want to. But what he saw was that you have to make the protons expand into each other so that they cross over each other's bubbles. And when you do that, it's going to look like a flower of life pattern. And the big secret here, what he discovered was the mass of all the Planck particles, as he would call it, inside a proton is equivalent to the mass of the universe. It's a oneness principle. That's very interesting. Nassim has a lot more on this that you can delve into. The next thing that is so important here is the idea that electron clouds also have the geometry, not just the actual protons inside the nucleus. And again, I did cover this before, but I'm refreshing your memory, and maybe you're a new viewer and you didn't see all this before. So take a real quick look at this. This is the sp3 electron orbital model in which we see, sure enough, these electron clouds. They're not really particles. They're how the energy flows into the center. They make a tetrahedron. There it is again. And then in this diagram, we see different types of geometry showing up, like the octahedron on the bottom left. And you look at it from the side, same kind of thing. When IBM took a picture of a single molecule, it was way more geometric than they thought it should be. Look at this. Once again, the hologram of the cosmos. So all of this quantum information, all of this stuff about geometry that I'm saying is large-scale structures at the highest levels. The superclusters of galaxies are all in this geometric pattern. And it's down there in the atomic nucleus, the smallest stuff we can see. What about DNA? This is where it gets really, really interesting, because the DNA molecule at the tiniest level shows us the same geometry, and it's unbelievable. Let's take a look. This is a view of the DNA molecule, and what you see here is that just even in the most basic arrangement of the stuff that's inside, you have hexagons and pentagons. But there's a lot more to it than that. Geometry is the big secret. This is what I wanted to end this episode on. This diagram is so incredibly amazing, and I want you to study this closely. Let's start by looking at the red line, start at the bottom, and then move your way up, and notice that that red line and the green line is the way that we've all seen DNA work. Well, look at how the red line hugs perfectly along the side of a dodecahedron when you stack them up in a nice little totem pole. The first one is a dark dodecahedron. Then look at the second one. It's technically upside down now from the first one. And notice that the green DNA line hugs precisely along that same side. Then go up to the third one. And it's the same thing. The red line hugs the side of the dodec. And then go up to the fourth one, and once again, the red line is hugging the side. So, look, if you don't think this means anything, wait until you get to the next episode about genetic geometry. What I'm saying to you is, this is not a conspiracy theory. This is not a coincidence. And for God's sake, you don't need 12-strand DNA. I'm sorry about the people who want to believe that, and I think the intention behind it was well-meaning. But you don't need 12 strands. One strand DNA is amazing in and of itself. Well, actually the 2 strands, right? I'm thinking of the one strand as a whole, but there's 2 sides to the ladder. And what we're seeing now is that it's as if the dodecahedron is a framework that it's built over. Like the dodecahedron is telling the atoms where to go. Well, I'm not saying that's an accident. I'm saying that's on purpose. I'm saying that there is a geometric vibration, remember frequency, that creates a holding pattern that takes atoms and makes them want to do this. It makes the basic matter in our universe want to create DNA because those little dodecs are out there as a vibration. And when they're there, they're going to take whatever is around them and say, you get over here, you get over here, everybody come on in. Here's what you're going to do. Spiral this way up, do this. Quantum mechanics makes life, and it's a frequency. The frequency pattern is what creates life. In the beginning, there was the Word. That's another one you see all the time, right? This is the Word. This is the sound. This is the Aum. It is the primordial vibration that not only created the universe, but it created life. So when we come back in the next episode, we're going to take this little seed that we've just started to play around with and take it into a whole much greater level than we had before. And this directly impacts everything we've been talking about regarding the solar flash and ascension, because as our energetics in our solar system upgrades, that frequency change will change matter, it'll change the rate of time, and it'll change the structure of biological life, pushing it to a higher evolution. I'm David Wilcock, and this is Wisdom Teachings, bringing you the information you need that will set you free. Thanks for watching.